In 357 BC, Philip II of Macedon turned his gaze away from the interior.
His first target was Amphipolis, a city of immense strategic value, holding the keys to timber and precious metals. Amphipolis controlled the crossing of the Strymon River and access to the country's interior. Philip wasted no time, capturing the city and securing his new acquisition with a garrison. With the city fell the deposits of precious metals and the timber essential for building a fleet. Soon after securing the river, Philip attacked Pydna on the Macedonian coast.
The Athenians, who held Pydna and claimed Amphipolis, declared war, but their response was distant and delayed.
Philip responded to the declaration of war not just with steel, but with cunning diplomacy approaching the Chalcidian League. He promised to acquire for them the Athenian clericy of Potidea, turning Athens' neighbors against her. This transfer was meant to happen in 356, and Philip laid siege to the town to fulfill his bargain. But while still besieging Potidea, Philip received a desperate request from the east. The Greek colony of Crenades, located in the hinterland of Neapolis, was threatened by a Thracian king. Seeing an opportunity, Philip placed a garrison in the town and refounded it under his own name, Philippi. By this, he gained another foothold in the east and the opportunity to exploit the Pangaeum's rich deposits. The Pangaeum mines would fuel Macedonia's rise with an endless stream of precious metal. The Thracian king, in whose territory Philippi lay, joined the coalition against Philip, but was quickly subdued. By the end of the year, the Thracian king was a vassal, and Philip had extended his rule up to the Nestus River. In the autumn of 355, Philip turned his attention to Methone, Athens' last remaining foothold on his shores. He succeeded in forcing it to surrender after a prolonged and brutal siege. This represented not only a material victory but a public relations triumph, exposing Athenian weakness. For the Athenians had not offered the town any help, even though the social war had ended and they possessed the means. Encouraged, Philip thought a second attempt in the east worth his while in the spring of 353. He was active east of the Nestus to harm the Greek towns allied to Athens and impress the Thracian rulers. The outcome of this test satisfied Philip, proving the region was ripe for further conquest. In the autumn of 352, he returned to Thrace and marched rapidly across the Hebrus against Cersibleptes. Cersibleptes ruled the most easterly of the three Thracian kingdoms. Philip forced him to subordinate himself as a vassal, expanding Macedonian influence further east than ever before. We do not know if this expedition aimed at the Athenian territories on the Thracian Chersonese. But Philip suddenly fell ill and had to curtail the campaign. These activities served to safeguard and expand the Macedonian kingdom, directed primarily against Athens. However, what secured a decisive influence over central Greece occurred between these two Thracian campaigns. Energetic predecessors had always pursued three aims: subjugating Upper Macedonia, reaching the Strymon, and extending influence into Thessaly. Philip had achieved the first two relatively quickly, surpassing his predecessors. He pushed the western border up to Lake Ohrid and the eastern to the Nestus. He brought the precious metal deposits of the Pangaeum and Bisaltia under his control. Now, he gave his attention to the third objective, Thessaly.
He exploited tensions between the Aleuadae and Larissa and the tyrants of Pherae.
We will not tolerate this aggression!
Larissa will fall if you resist the League.
A first intervention took place as early as 358, securing the position of his friends among the nobility.
Philip intervened a second time in 355 in favor of the Thessalian League. This made it possible for the League to commence a sacred war, jointly with the Thebans against the Phocians.
The Phocians had been in Delphi for over a year without punishment.
Philip understood that getting involved in central Greece might open a door to personal influence.
An influence which could then perhaps be brought to bear against the Athenians. But the sacred war seemed to come to an end in the autumn of 354.
Philip saw no chance of personally intervening and turned against Thrace in the spring of 353.
Then the hoped-for turn of events occurred. An offensive by the Phocians under Onomarchus. The conflict between the Thessalians and the tyrants of Pherai rekindled. Smoke rises from burning farmhouses as mercenaries raid the countryside.
The tyrants turned to the Phocians, and the Thessalians turned to Philip.
At first, Philip experienced success, but then suffered 2 defeats by Onomarchus.
He had to retreat to Macedonia, a rare and stinging setback for the rising king.
Philip did not accept defeat. He returned in 352 BC, his army rebuilt and his resolve hardened like iron. He had the supreme command over the armies of the Thessalian League transferred to himself. He routed Onomarchus in a decisive clash that would reshape the power balance of Greece. Onomarchus was slain, and the Phocian army was destroyed, their sacrilege punished by Philip's hand. Soon afterward, Pherai and its port Pagasae fell, bringing the tyrannies there to an end.
It would have been natural for Philip to use these successes to legitimize his position as Thessalian supreme commander.
He marched his troops against Thermopylae, held by the Phocians, to deal a decisive blow against the temple robbers.
However, this was no longer an issue concerning only Philip and the Phocians.
Control of Thermopylae would have opened the way south for the Macedonian king.
He found the pass occupied by troops of the Phocians, Athenians, Achaeans, and Spartans.
Even the tyrants expelled from Pherai were there with their mercenaries.
Philip, realizing the cost was too high, had to withdraw again.
As a result, the battles in central Greece continued without him, the enemies wearing each other out to his advantage.
Thus he turned for some years to other issues in the north, to Thrace and Epirus.
We must secure these borders immediately.
He turned to his relations with the Chalcidian League, which had long ago ceased to be an ally.
The League had become an alien element in the much enlarged Macedonia.
The folly of alerting Philip to this fact through insubordination presented him with a reason to intervene.
Down with Philip. Down with Macedon.
This led to the destruction of Olynthus in 348.
It resulted in the dissolution of the League and the annexation of its territory.
A military alliance with the Athenians, sealed in the summer of 349, was not enough to save the Chalcidians. Indeed, throughout these years, the Athenians had not managed to achieve military success against Philip. He, for his part, had not only refrained from seriously pursuing the Athenians, but had signaled a desire for peace.
He repeatedly signaled his desire for peace by indications or even clear offers.
His military activities decreased noticeably after 352, without his relinquishing his aim to wield decisive influence.
But Philip could afford to wait.
When the Phocians at last conceded defeat in 346, they informed him of their capitulation.
It was owing to him that the conditions turned out to be less harsh than had been demanded by some members of the Amphictyoni.
Philip could believe that he had resolved the situation in central Greece in a manner beneficial to himself. He was already assured of lasting influence in the region by his having been given both of the Phocian votes.
He was also able to call on those of the Thessalians and their neighbors.
Hunters. Philip had transformed from a northern outsider to the central figure of Greek politics.
Yet, in Athens, voices like Demosthenes continued to warn against the peace.
They are coming from the north. We must not trust Philip.
The mercenaries who had fueled the sacred war were disbanded, leaving a vacuum of power. Philip took it upon himself to oversee the restoration of the sanctuary.
To cement his status, Philip was appointed to preside over the Pythian Games.
While Greece slept under the new peace, Philip did not neglect his northern borders.
His military reforms continued, the Sarissa becoming the instrument of his dominance. Hold the line! Push! Keep those spears level!
The wealth from the mines and the tribute flowing into Pella transformed the Macedonian court.
Within the court, the future was being groomed in the form of his heir. The peace of Philocrates was not an end, but a pause, a breath before the next great exertion.
He solidified his western flank through his relations with Epirus.
Athens, stripped of allies and influence, was forced to accept Philip's friendship. Sparta remained isolated and sullen, refusing to acknowledge the new order. Thrace was now a buffer zone, firmly under the heel of Macedonian garrisons. Philip had proven that he could win wars with words and gold as effectively as with spears.
He began to speak of a united Greece, a pan-Hellenic crusade.
We must unite against...
The years following 346 were a deceptively quiet time in central Greece.
But the friction between the old powers and the new master could not be suppressed forever. Philip had laid the foundation. The world was now ready to be reshaped. The greatest prize was not gold, but legitimacy, as Philip was awarded the 2 votes previously held.
No longer a barbarian outsider, the King of Macedon was now the arbiter of Greek holy law.
He could also call upon the votes of the Thessalians and their neighbors, effectively controlling the majority of the council.
It was owing to him that
The kitchens for the defeated Phocians turned out to be less harsh than demanding extremists.
The Phocians were forced to destroy their walled towns and live in villages, neutralizing them as a military threat forever. They were obligated to pay an annual tribute to the temple to repay what they had stolen. Philip cast himself not as a conqueror, but as the pious restorer of Apollo's honor.
To crown his achievement, he was given the presidency of the Pythian Games, a chaotic honor usually reserved for Greeks alone. The Athenians, sullen and defeated in diplomacy, refused to send a delegation to the Games. But protest was futile, for Philip had resolved the situation in central Greece in a manner entirely beneficial to himself.
He had proven that he could afford to wait, letting his enemies exhaust themselves before stepping in to claim the prize. In Athens, the peace treaty discredited the war party and left the city with no legal grounds to oppose him.
With the south pacified, Philip ensured the Thracian kings remained completely subservient.
The garrison at Philippi stood as a permanent sentinel over the gold mines and the road to the east.
The gold of Pangaeum continued to flow, funding the professional army that frightened the citizen militias of the south.
His army was no longer a feudal levy, but a year-round machine of war.
The Sarissa phalanx had proven itself superior to the traditional hoplite warfare.
And his companion cavalry remained the hammer to the phalanx's anvil. He also cultivated the future by taking the sons of nobles as royal pages, hostages who became loyal officers.
Pella became a center of culture, attracting poets, artists, and philosophers from across the Greek world.
It was in this era of consolidation that he would soon invite Aristotle to tutor his heir. The young Alexander watched his father's diplomatic masterstrokes, learning that victory is not always won on the battlefield. The ruins of Olympus remained a stark warning to any Greek city that considered betrayal.
The Chalcidian League was a memory, its people scattered or enslaved, its territory swallowed whole.
The Athenians looked back on their failure to save Olympus with bitter regret, realizing they had missed their last chance to check Philip in the north.
Philippus's web of alliances now stretched from Epirus in the west to the Black Sea in the east. For the moment, the Greeks felt a sense of security, believing the peace might last. But Philip's ambition was a fire that consumed all fuel. He did not intend to stop at Delphi. He began to circulate the idea of a united Greece, led by Macedon, turning its aggression outward. Only Sparta remained defiant, a broken tooth in the jaw of the Peloponnese, ignored but unconquered.
His marriage alliances, particularly with Olympias of Epirus, kept his western border secure.
Philip bore the scars of his energetic reign. A lost eye, a crippled leg, broken bones.
Yet his spirit remained unbroken, his energy surpassing that of men half his age.
Athens remained divided between those who saw him as a savior
And those who saw a tyrant.
Philip quietly supported factions in Euboea, keeping Athens occupied on its own doorstep. He launched punitive expeditions against the Illyrians to remind them of Macedonian strength.
He had transformed Macedonia from a backwater victim of invasion into the hegemon of the Balkans.
His genius lay not just in battle, but in the administration of his conquests.
Ensure the silver mines increase output by 20%.
The Peace of Philocrates was the foundation upon which he would build the League of Corinth. But for now, the business of the sacred war was concluded. The catapults were dismantled, the sarissas racked, and the horses rested. Yet Philip's remaining eye never slept, always watching for the next weakness to exploit. He understood that timing was the essence of kingship. The events of 346 marked the point of no return for the Greek city-states. Philip could look south from Mount Olympus and see a land that was finally his to command.
He had secured his kingdom, his borders, and his influence. The stage was set for his son.
This was not the end of the story, but the end of the beginning of the Macedonian Empire.
Through diplomacy, war, and patience, Philip II had reshaped the ancient world.
And in the quiet halls of Pella, the king planned his next move. For centuries, our view of the ancient world has been curated.
He burdened students with the complex, elitist puzzles of Ovid, asking them to untangle threads of mythology that held little weight for the common man. Yet, if we look away from the poets and toward the law, we find the pulsing heartbeat of daily Roman life. Roman legal texts are not dry dust. They are scripts of ordinary life, filled with the quarrels, debts, and dramas of actual people. Might these raw, unfiltered moments not speak more directly to a modern student than the distant songs of gods?
Beyond the law, there is the tangible genius of structure. The Roman world was built by hands that wrote manuals, not just verses.
Architectural handbooks offer a gateway into the engineering mind that conquered the Mediterranean.
Or consider the military handbooks, the cold, pragmatic instructions that directed the legions to victory.
These texts are not art. They are survival, mechanics, and discipline, offering a starkly different texture of Latin.
And from the pragmatic Roman to the intellectual Greek, why do we neglect the foundations of medicine?
The Hippocratic corpus reveals the ancient struggle to understand the frail human body, a universal language of pain and healing. Perhaps the most intimate voices are found not in books, but in the trash heaps of antiquity, the papyrus letters.
These are letters from errant sons to irate fathers, captured forever in the dry sands of Egypt.
They speak of debts, disappointments, and family squabbles that remain unchanged across millennia.
But above all, there is a glaring omission in our classical education: the exclusion of Jewish and Christian texts. We study the pagan world in detail, yet ignore the massive cultural force of Judaism that existed alongside it. While there is no surviving Jewish literature in Latin from antiquity, the Greek texts are voluminous and vital.
To end this exclusion would be to bring the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament, into the fold of Greek literature.
We ignore the powerful narratives of Jewish resistance to Hellenism, stories that define the 2nd century BC. And the Sec of Maccabees are not just religious texts. They are war journals, political manifestos, and tragedies.
Conveniently hidden in the Apocrypha, these texts bear directly on the impact of Greek culture in the Hellenistic period.
Take the account of Jason, the high priest in the 170s BC, a man who courted the favor of the Greeks.
He was pleased to found a gymnasium right below the Holy Acropolis, a shock to the conservative city. There, he conducted the noblest young men, the ephebes, introducing them to foreign customs. He even had them wear the petassos, the broad-brimmed Greek sun hat, a symbol of Hermes and Hellenism.
This was the height of Hellenismos, the advance of foreign customs through the pollution of the impious Jason. Jason, no true high priest, had corrupted the sacred office with secular ambitions.
The fascination was so great that the priests were no longer eager to conduct the services of the altar.
Despising the temple and neglecting the sacrifices, they were drawn away by a new siren song.
They rushed to take part in the exercises of the palaestra, the wrestling school.
This image, the priest abandoning the altar for the discus, perfectly encapsulates the crisis of culture.
If we allowed ourselves this angle of vision, the ancient world would expand before our eyes.
We could accept the centrality of Josephus, writing in Greek within the heart of Rome. He represented to the pagan world a history going back to the very creation, challenging their timeline.
We might even read the Gospels and Acts not just as scripture, but as vivid views of provincial society.
These texts provide a window into the Roman Empire, seen from the bottom up.
Including these texts allows us to follow the transmission of faith from a Greek context into a Latin one. We arrive at the Greco-Roman world of late antiquity, a melting pot of belief, Here, pagan culture and tradition lived in uneasy coexistence with Judeo-Christian beliefs.
We must remind ourselves that in the 4th and 5th centuries, this hybrid world was the reality for the largest number of people.
As Augustine's picture of his education shows, this was perhaps the most classical of all periods.
But there is a second reason to include these texts, to help the modern beginner enter the classical world.
The clash between Christianity and paganism is illustrated by texts of outstanding dramatic force.
The acts of the Christian martyrs combine linguistic simplicity with profound stakes.
These acts are not tape recordings, but ancient literary evocations of the trials.
They serve to focus on exactly what was at stake in the clash of two views of the world.
Consider the earliest known martyr act in Latin, the trial of the Silletan martyrs in AD 180.
One of the proconsul's questions evokes a response of far greater significance than the simple language suggests.
What things are there in your box?
The books and letters of Paulus, a righteous man.
The mention of Paul, a Roman citizen, a Jewish disruptor, a Christian apostle, rings out in the African court like a bell.
With that sentence, we have the very earliest evidence for the translation of the New Testament into Latin, the language of the empire.
This humble beginning in Africa was a process that would culminate centuries later in the great work of Jerome.
Jerome's revision produced the Vulgate, the text that would become the Bible of the Catholic Church for over a millennium. In principio creavit Deus caelum et terram. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth.
Terra autem erat inanis et vacua. The earth was void and empty until God said.
From one point of view, the diffusion of this specific text shaped how the Western world understood reality itself. But from another view, might not these simple, pregnant sentences provide a perfect entry point for beginners?
Unlike the tangled mythology of the poets, these sentences are grammatically simple yet carry the weight of the universe.
If we wish to use Christian Latin to teach, there is no better choice than the trial of Fructuosus, Bishop of Tarragona.
The year is 259 AD, and the bishop stands before the governor, Aemilianus, in a clash of authority.
The dialogue is a masterclass in grammar. Note the loaded use of tenses and the deployment of subordinate clauses.
Audisti quid imperatores praeseperunt? Have you heard what the emperors have ordered?
Fructuosus answers with defiance disguised as ignorance.
Nescio quid praeseperunt. I do not know what they have ordered.
He continues with a simple present tense statement of being. Ego Christianus sum. I am a Christian. Praeseperunt Deos coli. They have ordered that the gods are to be worshipped.
The clash focuses on number, the plural deeos of the state versus the singular deum of the bishop.
Fructuosus replies, I worship the one God, who made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them. Aemilianus asks, Schis esse Deos? Do you know that there are gods? A question of knowledge, not just faith.
Fructuosus answers simply, a rejection of the very existence of the pagan pantheon.
Nescio, I do not know.
Schis postea.
Aemilianus replies with a chilling future tense.
You will know later on.
The dialogue moves to its climax, a stark exchange of identity and time.
Who are you?
I am a man of this time.
Aemilianus asks, Episcopus es? Are you a bishop?
Fructuous answers, Sum. I am. A present reality. Sum.
Aemilianus delivers the verdict with a single change of tense. Fuisti. You were.
In that one word, fuisti, The death sentence is passed, and the history of persecution is encapsulated. This illustrates the three themes we must consider: the sheer scale of the ancient world in time and space. Secondly, the significance of these Jewish and Christian texts, which we would do well to include in our view.
And thirdly, the use to which these texts can be put. Grammatically simple, but pregnant with meaning.
If space allowed, we could speak of the hundreds of thousands of inscriptions and papyri. These give us direct access to the words written in thousands of small towns and villages.
Many of these texts would also serve for beginners starting to read Greek or Latin. But instead, let us indulge in Jerome's brilliantly journalistic account of the life of Hilarion.
Hilarion, an inhabitant of the ancient city of Gaza, born in the 290s. He converted in the early years of the 4th century to the life of a Christian ascetic.
The ancient Philistine city of Gaza was now, in fact, a perfect example of a Greco-Roman place.
Long since Hellenized, it had been given the status of a Roman colony in the 3rd century.
Hence, in principle at least, it used Latin in its public affairs.
Audite cives, nova lex asenatulata est.
Its two chief annual magistrates even bore the Latin title Duum Viri. As a Roman city, Jerome reports, it held an annual festival in honor of the god Consus. This was to commemorate the rape of the Sabine women, a distinctly Roman myth celebrated in Gaza. As part of the festival, a Christian named Italicus was due to enter a quadriga, a 4-horse chariot.
He was racing against one owned by a pagan doomvir and feared the effect of spells.
So Hilarion was asked to provide holy water to scatter over the Christian-owned horses.
The water was for the horses, the quadriga, and their charioteer, a counter-magic to the pagan spells.
Thus, Jerome records, when the signal was given, they flew off, and the others were held up. Jerome picks up here the tradition of sports journalese, inaugurated in Iliad 23, using the historic present.
Under the Christian chariot, the wheels grow red hot. They can scarcely see their rivals' backs as they fly past.
The race concludes in a blur of dust and glory, a physical manifestation of the spiritual battle. The stadium, packed with thousands of spectators, erupts into a singular, thunderous roar.
But they do not shout the name of the driver. They shout a theological verdict. Marnus victus est a Christo.
Marnus, the local pagan god of Gaza, has been defeated not by theology, but by horsepower.
Jerome records this with the satisfaction of a war correspondent who has seen the tide turn.
So indeed it was to be in the end, but the reality was not as instant as the race.
It took several hundred years, where worshippers of Christ and of the pagan deities coexisted.
This was a world of hybridity, where traditions blended before one finally overtook the other.
We must remember that in this period, more people were educated in Greek and Latin language, culture, and tradition than ever before.
The bureaucracy of the late empire required a vast army of literate citizens. This was not a decline into darkness. It was a flourishing of communication. We should not be afraid, in the modern world, to boast of just how much of human history all this represents. It represents millions of lives, voices, and texts that we have sidelined for too long.
Equally, we should allow ourselves to think about Latin in a new way.
We must ask how the modern beginner can best be helped to approach the Greco-Roman world.
If we only give them complex poetry and mythological puzzles, we build a wall, not a door.
But if we offer them the clarity of the Vulgate, or the drama of the martyrs, we offer them texts that are grammatically simple but pregnant with deep, world-changing meaning. It is time to widen the canon, to let the edges of the map fill in the center.
Let the lawyer speak alongside the poet.
Arms and the man I sing, who first from the shores of Troy.
Therefore, the boundary lines...
Let the architect's manual sit beside the philosopher's treatise.
And let the simple, stark Latin of the believer challenge the ornate rhetoric of the politician.
Let us acknowledge that Rome was not just Roman, and Greece was not just Greek. They were deeply intertwined with the Jewish world.
And that the story of Christianity is not an epilogue to the classical world, but a vital chapter within it.
This approach gives us a truly global view of antiquity, stretching from the sands of Gaza to the walls of Britain.
It allows us to hear the village as well as the city.
The tens of thousands of papyri are waiting to be read, full of human drama.
Receipts, love letters.
They give us direct access, unmediated by centuries of editing.
For the beginner, the joy of decoding a real human message is the spark that ignites a lifetime of learning.
We must stop asking, is this literature, and start asking, is this life?
The Septuagint must take its rightful place as a masterpiece of Hellenistic Greek.
The Maccabean narratives must be read as the powerful anti-imperial texts they are. For the law, for the temple, to victory!
The Acts of the Martyrs must be appreciated for their dramatic force and linguistic clarity.
And the Latin of the Vulgate must be seen as the bridge to the next 1,000 years of history.
This is a new pedagogy, one that values communication over complexity.
Quid est in arca?
In arca est liber.
It invites the student to step into the ancient world, not as a puzzle solver, but as a listener.
The wealth of the past is vast, and we have only been mining one small vein.
By breaking the elite bubble of high literature, we democratize the ancient world.
Like Hilariion's chariot, we must let the wheels of our education grow red-hot with relevance.
The victory is not in the complexity of the grammar, but in the power of the meaning.
A richer canon awaits us, one that includes the erratic, the angry, the faithful, and the brave.
So we return to the question, why have we allowed our view to be so narrowed?
The door is open. The texts are there. We just need to pick them up.
Let us think about Latin not as a dead language of the past, but as a living key to human experience.
For the student who starts today, the ancient world can be as vivid as the morning news.
Rome, Jerusalem, Athens, Gaza, all part of one vast human story.
No longer alien, no longer distant.
The invitation is open. Audisti? Have you heard?
The answer lies in the texts we choose to read.
If the canon fractures, we shall reshape it.